A warm welcome to all of you who have joined us via Zoom or YouTube at the online international multidisciplinary symposium, Music, Religion and Spirituality. Between today and Saturday, we will share some 20 papers prepared by researchers of different generations at different stages of their scholarly careers from 13 countries and from 5 continents. Their specific focuses will encompass several religious and spiritual frames, including Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Sikhism, and I would also mention Alevism and Sufism here separately. And also a variety of spiritual practices that intersect with music or sound and dance or movement. And here I'm pointing out to the sensitive use of these terms. The program is organized into 9 sessions, 3 sessions per day, which cover a wide range of topics. Today, we will move from ritual context to Heritagisation, from urban religious soundscapes to the pandemic-caused medialization of religious rites, and to the phenomenon known in Croatian music scholarship as Glagolitic singing. Tomorrow, we will concentrate on the intersections of the key terms in the African context, on the past and present migrations and diasporas. And the last day will feature on the intersections in South Asia and South America, and end up with the important contexts of Sufism and Alevism. So I will use this 15 minutes spot just to add a few visualized notions to the contexts, to the contents of the introduction in your booklets. B, to point to the intention to establish a new ICTM study group, and this symposium is a required step in this direction. And C, provide you with some essential technicalities needed for the optimal running of the event. So let me start with first. So nearly every form of religion or spirituality has a vital connection with arts, claims the Oxford Handbook of Religion and the Arts, which analyzes artistic ways of being religious, as well as religious ways of how to be artistic. So how and to what extent is ethnomusicology reflecting that? By the way, this picture here that you see is from Ljubljana. This is from one of the Tara Yoga centers. So we will go to Timothy Rice's notion, pointing to the second half of the 20th century. And here you can see that studies on religion and spirituality were definitely not a part of the ethnomusicological mainstream. Jeff Titan mentioned to me at some point also that the SEM annual meetings usually had these sections on religion or papers on religion in the early terms and in the smaller rooms, because it was not considered that it is something very interesting for many ethnomusicologists. And I would point out here, when we are talking about SEM, to the special issue, Music and Religion from 1996 of the Ethnomusicology Journal. And for me personally, I would also mention Philip Bowman's article on pilgrimage politics and musical remapping of New Europe, and his research in Mariazell, in the very famous pilgrimage place in Austria. With the next slide, I would remind us on Lois Ibsen Al-Farouki, and we can talk about many aspects here, about the terminology, especially that we are talking about Quran, about recitation, about chant, but by no means singing. So this is also an example of emic versus ethic views, which is widely used in education as such. And also the question, can ethnomusicologists study this kind of phenomena? And I would say yes, with full respect, as shown by Christina Nelson or Joseph Paholczyk and several who followed these early cases. The next slide reminds us to the connection with rituals, and we can see just one picture from the Zikr of the Rufai Brotherhood in Kosovo. We are talking about Sufism, of course. Entirely different attitudes towards the key intersection, though still within the same Islamic religious framework. Let's move to the next one. I'm taking you now to the church-related community of bell ringers in Limerick, Ireland. The same group of musicians does the Sunday job twice. first at the Anglican Church and then in the Catholic Church. And here we can talk about the communities, about politics, and of course about the use of musical instruments. The importance of gospel music worldwide, we will hear about this, I guess, also in the paper about Ghana, also for the developments of the mainstream popular music scene. So several established pop singers point to their crucial experience in Baptist and other church choirs. Ethnomusicology of the individual, I would here point to Fela Anikulapo Kuti, the Nigerian 20th century popular music icon, using music as a weapon, in his words, to, among other aims, advocate worship within the roots in the African continent. This is a very complex theme on the war peace continuum, to which I contributed as researcher and author, but also as lecturer. And here I would also like to emphasize my very positive experience in the summer course of the Canadian Mennonite University in 2019, which is very actively involved in the peace building. And finally, a common consequence of wars are migrations and diaspora communities. And we all look towards Afghanistan these days because of this and many other questions. Two sessions within our symposium analyze these phenomena in both historical and contemporary perspectives. Now let me briefly turn to the second part of this presentation. So comparable to the position statement of the Yale Journal of Music and Religion, which started in 2015, as I'm quoting, Forum for the Study of Sacred Music in all its ritual, artistic, and cultural contexts, which promotes scholarship on religious music of all traditions across a range of methodologies, situating it within the worlds of beliefs and practices, end of quote. But also to the position statement of the Society for Ethnomusicology section on religion, music, and sound, which, quote, supports the study of sacred music broadly defined, including religious, devotional, ritual, ceremonial, and spiritual musics in their cultural and social contexts, end of quote. The envisioned ICTM study group with the working title Music, Religion, Spirituality should be wide open to intersections of the three concepts in both spatial and temporal terms. So what would be the novelty and advantage of the envisioned study group? ICTM study groups referred to an often quoted statement by Stephen Wild are the lifeblood of the council, allowing regular scholarly meetings of researchers interested in a single theme or region in various parts of the world and lasting for several days. Based on the experience with the ICTM's currently 26 study groups, 11 of them defined geographically on the left side and 15 thematically, there is no doubt in my mind that such a focused and dedicated community would considerably contribute to the scholarly advancement of the intersections of music, religion, and spirituality. Just try to imagine joint symposia. This is another excellent opportunity that ICTM offers, of the envisioned study group dealing with music, religion, and spirituality with almost any of those study groups that you can see on your screens. Here I would add that also we can think of cooperating with the sister societies, not only SEM, but also Free Muse, which takes care of documentation of examples of censorship and advocating freedom of artistic expressions, or International Music Council with the 5 musical rights, which are inspired by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Then we can think about European Seminar in Ethnomusicology, British Forum, Société Française, and also the others. And then, of course, publications are a very, very good indicator of our colleagues who are very much involved in this. So several of the participants in this symposium published extensively on the topic, and we are so happy to have them here. But there are also those who do not present papers this time, but are supportive of this initiative, such as Philip Bowman or Gregory Barsh, Jonathan Dueck, Don Niles, Jeff Todd Titan, and Sarah Weiss. And I would particularly maybe point to Sarah's example, because her book, her most recent publication called Ritual Surroundings, Women Performers at World Religions, just received a honorable mention from the ICTM Book Prize Committee for 2021. So finally, let me squeeze a few technicalities in the remaining few minutes. Fully aware of A, the time zones of active participants whose locations stretched from Vancouver on Canada's west coast all the way to the Indian subcontinent in the east, and B, of the phenomenon known as among the scholars, and not only among scholars, as screen fatigue, we created rather short daily timeframes consisting of three sessions with short breaks, slightly over 3 hours each. So 15-minute individual presentations will be preceded by session chairs, short introduction of presenters. A 15-minute discussion spot is planned at the end of each session, so not after the paper presentation, but at the end of the session. And these sessions can consist of 2 or 3 papers, just depending on the particular case. Would there be a wish for additional discussion? We can continue after the end of the program planned for a day. The presenters of the day and the participants on Zoom only who would like to pose the questions are kindly asked to stay a bit longer. So whoever wants to leave after the end of the daily official program, of course, is more than free to do it. Please note that the final symposium day has an essential extension during which we should, A, define the new ICTM study group on music, religious, and spirituality in terms of a mission statement and select its executives, and B, make decisions about the publication of the articles in the peer-reviewed journal Musicological Annual. So this will probably be suitable for the active participants only, or them in the first place. Within the last year and a half, we are much more used to participate in online conference events, but technical difficulties are often unavoidable. Thus, just a moment.
You're muted now, Svanibor. You're muted.
Thank you. So within the last year and a half, we are much more used to participate in online conference events, but technical difficulties are often unavoidable. Thus, our computer specialists, Bharat, Rok, and Sebastian will be with us to help. So you can use chat for communicating with them if needed. Please make sure to mute your microphones when the other colleagues talk to assure the best possible sound environment. The breaks are rather short, so this is important. Please keep your Zoom connections on. So just mute the audio and stop the video. If your presentation has audio or video examples, please make sure after pressing the share screen arrow, press the buttons share sound and optimize for video clip, just in cases if you have audio or video examples. And in case of need, the breaks can be used for short trial runs. Please let us know in the chat about that. So thank you very much for your kind attention and welcome once again. I'm now giving the word to our respected colleague, Jean Ngoya Kidula, who will chair the first session.
Good day, everyone. Good night, wherever you are. I have no idea where you are. But thank you very much, Professor Svanibor, Pettan, and your institution and your country for hosting this gathering to share knowledge and wisdom of previous and current scholarship exploring music, religion, and spirituality. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our very first presenters. Each of them will present for 15 minutes, I will introduce the next one as the previous one gets off and the next one sets up. And then at the end, we will have a discussion. So please write out your questions, and we'll get to you with that. Our very first opening presentation is by Brita Heimarck. She's an associate professor of music at Boston University in the US. She received her PhD degree from Cornell University. She has written a number of books. They include Balinese Discourse on Music and Modernization, Village Voices and Urban Views, as well as Gender Wayang Music in Bapak in Wayan Locheng from Sukawati, Bali, a music biography, musical ethnography, and critical edition. She specializes in music and mysticism, yogic traditions, Bali, Indonesia, India, theorizations of sacred sound, and sacred sound practices in the US. Brita, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. All right. Hello, everybody. I am going to share, I have a PowerPoint and a few video examples, so I'll share my screen with you now. Music as a spiritual tool and religious ritual accompaniment. In this presentation, I investigate the musical dimensions of certain Hindu or yogic, religious, and spiritual practices, and consider music as both a ceremonial accompaniment that creates a sacred time and space for musical rites of passage, and recitation of sacred text as a musical ritual itself. I will discuss the concept of music as a tool in religious or spiritual contexts. One fundamental trait that ritual practices and yogic traditions have in common is the intention to put theory into practice. In addition, the outer practice has an inner dimension, or in other words, the outer ritual act is also an inner experience. Thus, there's a three-part cycle of theory, practice, and experience. Yogic theories and philosophies concerning inner sounds and sacred resonances can be found in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika of the 15th century, as well as earlier treatises of South Asia, where bells, drums, thunder, the conch, and the primordial sound Om describe the divine sounds known as nada that arise from within during meditation. While these inner sounds clearly derive from an inner source, it is notable that several of these instruments may be sounded during the ritual worship known as arati, and their vibrations are believed to have a purifying effect on the mind and body. Putting theory into practice, enabling a direct experience of God, is the goal of yoga and connects closely with tantric aims and practices as well. According to S.K. Ramachandra Rao in Tantra Mantra Yantra, the Tantra Psychology, Tantra can be seen as the translation of theory into practice. Sankara is considered the great unifier who brought Vedic wisdom and theories of the cosmos together with tantric traditions and practices that were contemplative and focused on the individual. Consequently, most monistic tantras believed that reality is simultaneously transcendent and immanent. Further to this merging of Vedic influence with tantric tradition, in Sankara's interpretation of Advaita Vedanta in the latter part of the 6th century, Advaita was not meant to be a mere intellectual discipline. It was not only an approach to reality, a darsana, but a means to reach it, an upasana. There are deep intersecting and overlapping threads connecting Tantric Shaivism, Shakta Tantra, and Vaishnavite Tantric thought and practices with yogic practices of sacred sound. In particular, Siddha Yoga ashrams incorporate many Hindu ceremonies, hymns, and ritual worship such as Arati into their daily schedule, as well as meditation and contemplation. In yogic sacred sound practices, Hindu, Buddhist, and Tantric traditions, recitation of sacred mantras are means to assist the practitioner in reaching the goal of liberation. Within Tantric and yogic concepts of sacred sound, mantra represents a sonic threshold into a deeper form of body awareness and a pathway to enlightened states of consciousness. Most religious ceremonies, especially lengthy ones, require some form of musical accompaniment. But beyond this primary religious function, music also functions as a spiritual tool in many traditions. Let us consider what is meant by the term tool. Certainly, musical instruments may serve as ritual tools in certain contexts. For example, percussion instruments such as conchas and idiophones, rattles, or shakers enliven the South Asian Arati chants and may be seen to function as ritual tools in this setting. But what do I mean by a spiritual tool within this investigation? A tool may be defined as a device or implement, thing, or even person used to carry out a purpose. For example, tools of one's trade would be things used in an occupation or pursuit. In a religious or spiritual context, we might find tools used to further spiritual goals. I suggest that music and mantra are tools used to further both ceremonial events and spiritual illumination within the Hindu-based traditions of Bali, Indonesia, and South Asian Tantric and Yogic traditions. Beyond spiritual and ritual tools, I would also like to consider ways in which music may constitute a ritual act. A musical performance creates a sense of time and space through the enactment of sound over a period of time, and the presence of sound within distinct spatial boundaries. At the same time, religious texts expressing spiritual beliefs may be sung or chanted along with a musical accompaniment, adding to the complex symbolism of the ritual event. In their introduction to Music and Ritual, Bridging Material and Living Cultures, Raquel Pasalodos, Rupert Till, and Mark Howell define ritual as a human action linked with religious beliefs or spiritual needs. Thus, music that functions within a ritual context may be interpreted as a human action tied to the realms of religion and spirituality. And taking this analogy one step further, we may call this a musical ritual. Ritual performances might include additional human actions beyond the musical performance itself, including gestures, words, or text, as well as material objects required for certain ritual acts. I will give two examples of such musical rituals. The first example will focus on the musical accompaniment to a high-status cremation ceremony in Bali, where musicians may be asked to perform by sitting on a platform carried by dozens of men as part of an elaborate cremation tower. Two Genderwayang musicians may perform this sweet and haunting music while the procession carries the deceased from the family compound to the cremation grounds. The polos player sits on the left side of the tower and the sangsi player sits on the right. In this way, Genderwayang music is believed to accompany the soul of the dead person as it departs for the heavens. I will play my own video footage of this musical ceremony before proceeding to the next example. meditation tower in Sukawati, Bali, with genderwayang accompaniment on the sides. You may also notice marching gamelan music called belaganjur playing at the same time. This is part of the Balinese aesthetic known as ramai. The second example of a musical ritual that I will consider briefly is the chanting performance of a devotional text known as arati, that relates to the wider practice of this devotional ritual in many parts of India, other parts of Asia, and recontextualized traditions within the diaspora. Arati combines sacred devotional text that is chanted with a gestural ritual in which a dedicated Devi or ritual practitioner waves a tray or ritual object with one or more lit flames and possibly additional ritual components. This combination of music and ritual in arati represents a unique form of musical devotion. The tray or ritual object is waved in front of the guru, image, or deity, up and around in a circular motion. This ritual worship honors the guru or deity while asking them to awaken the fire of knowledge within. This musical ritual combines gesture in a circular motion, light, and sacred text with musical accompaniment, often harmonium, the pump organ accompanying the melody, and tabla or mridangam drums, as well as hand cymbals, and at times a conch and additional percussion punctuating the rhythmic cycle. Each verse returns to the refrain for the particular arati being sung. Here's a brief example of an arati performed by devotees of the 19th century Swami Narayan. Shri Swami Narayan Bhagavan Ki Jai. A large part of the power behind a musical ritual is the intention behind it, known in Sanskrit as sankalpa. Siddha Yoga Swamis have noted that if a person sets an intention before they start a ritual, they may have an even more powerful experience. On the more contemplative side, while sitting silently for meditation, some yogic practitioners may repeat mantras to themselves inwardly. This represents yet another dimension of sacred sound and the spiritual use of mantra or sacred syllables within the South Asian yogic tradition of meditation and inner reflection. Sacred sound that is unvoiced outwardly still circulates powerfully within the inner realms of contemplation and meditation. A japa mantra, or silent repetition of mantras, may occur within the inner spaces of the mind, representing the ancient spiritual discipline of unvoiced sacred sound in the Indian tradition. What is clear from these investigations of the Hindu-based traditions of South Asia and the musical ceremonies of Bali, Indonesia, is that these sacred sound practices are required for the South Asian devotional ritual known as arati and as a religious ritual accompaniment for high-status cremation processions in Bali to accompany the soul to its ultimate destination. Furthermore, in tantric and yogic traditions, it is believed that sacred sound practices, including mantra repetition and the inner or outer experience of sacred sounds, can lead to self-realization. Music is one of the most powerful tools we know of in both religious and spiritual traditions to support, accompany, and enact the goals of spiritual realization, transition through rites of passage or states of consciousness, and transformation. Musical devotion plays a significant role in these emancipatory practices, and musical rituals are perhaps the most fundamental practice for devotional worship and to facilitate transformation, as sacred sound permeates the inner worlds and connects the practitioner and all those listening to the experiential embodiment of divinity through sound. In the case of oddity, this divinity might be interpreted as the guru, knowledge or insights imparted by the guru, a deity or protection of a deity, or sacred sound itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Heimarck, for very concisely keeping your time. If you have any questions that you're thinking about, please write them out, and let me suggest that maybe you send me the questions, because you can probably directly chat with me like that, so you don't spend so much time. You can make it concise. We'll have a discussion after all three presenters have presented their work. If it's okay with Professor Heimarck, if you can remove your share.
Oh, yes, let me see here. Where did that go? Okay. Okay, there it is.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Jeffrey Summit. He holds the appointment of research professor in the Department of Music and in the Judaic Studies program at Tufts University in the US. He is the author of Singing God's Words, the performance of biblical chant in contemporary Judaism, and the Lord's Song in a Strange Land, Music and Identity in Contemporary Jewish Worship, both of which were published by the Oxford University Press. And he has a well-known CD known as Abayudaya, Music from the Jewish People of Uganda, which is part of the Smithsonian Folkways recordings, that was nominated for a Grammy Award. I'd like to welcome Professor Summit.
Thank you so much. And I just have to say it's an honor to be here. I only wish we were together in Ljubljana so we could go out for a drink after the conference. One of the fun things to do, God willing, when we're actually together. So my paper is Reimagining Spiritual Experience in Music, Perspectives from Jewish Worship in the United States. Here's my introduction. Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook was the first chief rabbi in Palestine under the British Mandate. Beloved for his inclusiveness of all people, respected for his rabbinic scholarship, Cook was known as a philosopher, a poet, and a mystic. In his poem, The Fourfold Song, he reflected how Jews performed their complex identities in pre-state Israel. Cook wrote, "There is one who sings the song of the self, and within oneself finds everything, full spiritual satisfaction." Cook continued, "Then there is one who sings the song of nation, attaching himself to the Jewish people, singing her songs, sharing in her distresses and hopes." Cook then expands the circle, and there is one who broadens herself further, yearning for humanity's common destiny, to sing the song of humanity. Cook then writes of the fourth song, the song of world creation, where one is unified with all existence, with all creatures and all worlds. While Rav Cook didn't intend his metaphors in this poem to be a way to understand music and spiritual expression in Jewish worship, these four categories can be helpful in exploring an increased focus on spirituality in the early 21st century in Jewish congregations in the United States. Cook's fourfold song can suggest a typology of categories that could be employed to consider how Jews in the 21st century experience music and worship, the song of self, the song of nation, the song of humanity, and the song of all existence. Now to a little background. I found it helpful to consider new ways to describe spiritual experience. The scholar of liturgy Lawrence Hoffman examined spirituality among Jews in North America, and he found that if he asked congregants for a moment when God is in your life, he discovered, quote, Jews don't know from God. But if he asked people if they'd experienced moments of profundity in their life, people replied very affirmatively. Hoffman concluded that many Jews lacked comfort with traditional spiritual language and said the question is therefore not just how people find spirituality in prayer, but how they find a language to adequately describe that experience. I found the language employed by the scholar of religion Ann Tavis to be helpful. She focuses on experiences deemed religious, or by extension, things considered special, rather than, quote, religious experience, a phrase that carries much more weight. This paper grew out of conversations with Jewish leaders, rabbis, and cantors who are not especially concerned with the belief in God, but much more focused on the experience of God. They're creating deeply spiritual services where music is a core component of Jewish worship. Many of the leaders I interviewed are part of what's called the Jewish Emergent Network, innovative worship communities that, while not affiliated with mainstream denominations, are having significant influence on congregational worship in the United States. The expanding circles of Rav Kook's fourfold song encompasses a broad range of the experiences described by the leaders I interviewed for this paper. So let's start with the Song of the Self. These leaders described how they're working to create musical experiences where the communal space of the synagogue can be a stage for personal experience, and where the individual's experience feels real, authentic, and true. Rabbi Noah Kushner, founder of the innovative synagogue called The Kitchen in San Francisco, used the analogy of tourists and pilgrims. She said, tourists mediate their experience with cameras and phones, but pilgrims have to get close enough to what's going on so that they could, because they want a transformative experience. She explained that she was much more interested in creating experiences for pilgrims who could bring their honest, authentic self to worship. I'm just going to close the windows here because it's noisy outside. Okay. She said, if that means you need to come to synagogue and sit and cry your eyes out, that's what I want you to do. If it means you need to dress up, then do that. And if you're a joker, I hope you would sit in the back of the room and make some jokes. People should come to synagogue and be who they really are. Rabbi Eben Leder, a faculty member of the Hebrew College Rabbinical School, stressed how much music could personalize the communal experience. He reflected that just as Jews have a written Torah and an oral Torah, the commentaries that make the text come alive and relevant, the same is true for prayer. But there, the written Torah is the prayer book, while the oral Torah is the music. He said, the role of the written Torah is to anchor you to generations past, and the purpose of the music is to anchor you to your own reality. What does this history look like when it actually exists in your life? In this way, the music of the service becomes a commentary, shaping the effective meaning of an individual's prayer. For example, Rabbi David Ingber, who founded the congregation Romamu in Manhattan, said that when you hear a new melody for a prayer, you can think, maybe sin and asking for forgiveness doesn't have to be guilt-laden. Maybe it could be reflective, or it could be joyous. In this way, the song of the self is amplified, and as Philip Bowman writes, music could be, quote, a means of redressing the frequent historiographic tendency to consider religion as a primary collective experience. I want to move on now to the song of the Jewish people. While the song of the self is very much about the individual's prayer experience, the experience of the collective is especially impactful in a culture that puts so much stress on the empowered individual, something that's deeply intensified by our use of social media now. Rabbi Monika Gomri, one of the founders of the organization Let My People Sing, said that one of the most profound lessons congregants learned by singing together is that the collective is more important than the individual. She explained that she'd often receive conflicting feedback from congregants. Someone wants a tune to be new, someone wants the old tune, someone wants it fast, someone wants it slow, someone loves this tune and hates that one. Gomri stressed that the core issue was how to build communities where individual preferences were not at the center of the worship experience. Congregational prayer, Gomri said, is a dance where the worshiper both needs to find a comfortable space for themselves while accepting that one's desires and one's preferences are not always met. She continued, song is our language for being a people, for being a family. And many of the leaders I interviewed felt that the give and take learned in the course of communal singing taught lessons that were a prerequisite for cooperative functioning communities. The leaders I interviewed, let me go on to the Song of Humanity. The leaders I interviewed believed that while their congregational worship was made richer by being distinctively Jewish, the experience should open participants to a much larger vision of the human connection. Rabbi David Ingber, founder of the community Romamu, said, people come to worship to be human. As the community prays for people who are sick and remembers people who have died, congregants experience a sense of collaborative vulnerability, a feeling that's enforced by the music and worship. Ingber explained that when congregants were deeply engaged in song, they knew that they needed the person next to them to create a more powerful sense of beauty and connection. So too, Rabbi Sharon Cohn, president of Hebrew College, spoke about how prayer could make you feel the sanctity of being part of something larger. She told this story, I was sharing a Hasidic teaching on the prayer, Moses rejoiced in the gift of his portion, his part, stressing that we're all just a part, a helek, we're not complete without each other. She explained it's one thing to teach a text, it's another thing when you sing that text in worship. Annisfeld explained that she had often thought about being a small part of something larger, but it's usually been connected to accepting one's limitations, vulnerabilities, insecurities, and jealousies, all the ways a person could feel small and diminished. I understood that if you truly can't embrace your partialness, she said, how could you feel part of anything? To connect that to joy was a revelation. Annisfeld explained that embracing your part could open the gates of the heart to joy of belonging to a more expansive human collective. And finally, the song of all existence. In the age of the Anthropocene, spirituality increasingly encompasses humanity's relationship with the natural world. Jeff Todd Titan writes that this idea is characteristic of many religious traditions and states, if all human beings are connected, then all are related, all are kin. The leaders I interviewed discussed a range of worship experiences where they felt a connection to the larger physical world and used natural imagery, water, waves, wind, to convey the holiness of those experiences. Sharon Cohn-Anisfeld again said, "The living waters are everywhere, and there are times when we feel connected or disconnected from that source of life." For her, music opened up the channels as she was carried by the waves and changes. Music is like water in the sense that it's flowing over you and through you. Both music and water allow for the experience of immersion, where you could lose yourself. Anisfeld explained that she came to experience God in this way through immersive, participatory singing in worship. Finally, in conclusion, referencing the 16th century Jewish legal code, the Shulchan Aruch, the composer Joey Weisenberg said, quote, "When leading prayer, if one only sings to hear their own voice, that's a travesty." He quoted the Hasidic teacher Rav Nachman of Bratslav, who taught that each person in the room has a point of goodness, and the leader's job is to link those points together. Each person holds one note, but if you put them together, they turn into a melody. While William James saw religious experience as, quote, individuals approaching the divine in their solitude, all of the experiences examined in this paper take place in the context of worshiping congregations, first centered in individual experience, but moving outward to encompass ever larger concentric circles of connection, created, brought together, and facilitated by the music of the service. While Rav Kook speaks of a fourfold song, he never privileges one song over another. All the voices are valued and necessary in a congregation. It is only in their coming together, one with another, creating polyphonic vitality in life, that they create a song of holiness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Samet, for that amazing presentation. Like I said before, if you have questions, please write them out so that we won't take so much time when it's time to ask for discussion. Our final presenter for this session, I hope I do not murder your name, but I'm going to say it as best as I'm thinking I can say it. Antti-Ville Kärjä works as Professor of Cultural Music Research at the University of the Arts in Helsinki, Finland. From 2016 to 2019, he chaired the Finnish Society for Ethnomusicology and was representing Finland in ICTM. His forthcoming publications include a monograph on the intersections of the popular and the sacred in music. Welcome, Professor Kärjä.
Thank you. And yes, congratulations for pronouncing my name, which usually causes people lots of problems. I mean, non-Finnish people, of course. Yes, likewise, I'd rather be at the riverbanks of Ljubljana now, but what can you do? So, Heritagisation of music proliferates. Since 2008, almost 250 music-related elements have been inscribed in the UNESCO lists of intangible cultural heritage. The phenomena in question range from ones in need of urgent safeguarding, such as Sega tambour chagos of Mauritius, to globally widespread idioms representative of humanity, as in the case of reggae music of Jamaica. 8 elements are also included in the register of good safeguarding practices, demonstrating different systems and methods of preservation, transmission, and awareness raising of endangered traditions. Scholarly debate about music heritagisation is equally on the increase. On the basis of a quick search into relevant databases, roughly 2/3 of the peer-reviewed articles that mention music heritage have been published after 2010. Yet, I dare posit, there are at least 3 different discourses operating within the institutional fields in question. First, the debate is arguably dominated by a preservationist discourse with links to the UNESCO initiatives and informed in no small part by ethnomusicology. One might call this the authorized music heritage discourse, as through UNESCO it has been by and large adopted and institutionalized on both national and supranational level, for instance by the European Parliament. Second, this dominance is increasingly challenged by a constructivist stance where emphasis is laid on popular music in urban environments and drawing from what is known as critical heritage studies. Within this discourse, attention has been paid on the variety of unauthorized community practices and the cultural politics at stake, including the inadvertent emergence of contested or dissonant heritage, if not outright cultural rubbish. Third, there is the conservationist counterpart of authorized music heritage discourse. Here, at the crux of the matter, are old musical instruments and how both musicological and scientific approaches may be of aid in creating digital models or otherwise keeping the manufacts intact and firmly locked in a display cabinet, away from the living musician, who by blowing into the instrument causes a violent thermo-hygro gradient that could damage this cultural heritage. The references to safeguarding humanity and discursive divides imply a variety of values and beliefs that underlie what is taken as music heritage, as well as the acts and processes and violence involved. In what follows, I aim at interrogating the role and significance of belief systems in and for conceptualizing music heritage, and crucially from two directions: cultural rubbish. Third, there is, now I hear a feedback. Sorry.
Just keep going. I think they might deal with it, tech people.
On the one hand, I am interested in how different belief systems, be they world religions or less doctrinal types of neo-paganisms or whatever, become interrelated with a given instance of music heritage. The material I use here comprises of the UNESCO ICH inscriptions. On the other hand, and admittedly more intensively, I am curious of how music heritage might be thought of as a belief system of its own. The dual centrality of belief systems for cultural heritage is encapsulated in the notion of authorized heritage discourse coined by Laura Jane Smith. In her words, at issue are aesthetically pleasing material objects, sites, places, and/or landscapes that current generations must care for, protect, and revere so that they may be passed to nebulous future generations for their education and to forge a sense of common identity based on the past. Thus, ideals of beauty and skills become enmeshed with future-oriented reverence, if not worship, of select phenomena that are further associated with sustaining collective values and demeanor and their historical foundations. In fact, Smith's core argument is that there is really no such thing as heritage, but instead heritage is best understood as a set of values and meanings, that is, a cultural practice. In its hegemonic authorized form, heritage serves to naturalize, validate, and regulate certain occurrences at the expense of others, and in so doing promotes a certain set of Western elite cultural values as being universally applicable. Indeed, echoes of such neo-colonial sentiments may be heard, for instance, in the Horizon Europe call for research and innovation proposals on Europe's cultural heritage and arts, promoting our values at home and abroad. The question nevertheless remains as to what are the values and meanings of the authorized music heritage discourse, epitomized as they are in the elements inscribed in the UNESCO ICH lists. One possibility to address the dilemma is to examine the variety of belief systems at play, including not only institutionalized religions, but also alternative spiritualities and movements, political ideologies, and a range of secular isms that might combine empirical evidence or trial and error with wishful convictions. An example of this is the ubiquity of technological determinism combined with the hopes invested in the alleged digital revolution and what some call the soteriology and eschatology of transhumanism. Indeed, coinciding with the diffusion of digital solutions and problems, there is what scholars of religion have variously discussed as post-secularization, re-enchantment, or proliferation of alternative spiritualities. The common theme in this discussion is the critique of the so-called secularization thesis. While the 20th century arguably signaled a shift in power from religious authorities to scientific, commercial, and political ones, in the third millennium, it has become evident that religion and religiosity still matter, albeit in new constellations. The big five world religions continue to structure people's lives and console them, even if the headlines are occupied by their fundamentalist, extremist, and populist distortions. There are also numerous smaller religious denominations that are no longer treated as heresy, but rather recognized as meaningful as the big ones, also a subject of academic inquiry. Some of these are present also in the UNESCO ICH inscriptions, like Rastafarianism in the case of reggae music of Jamaica. Moreover, alongside yoga, mindfulness, and esotericism, among other metaphysical practices, fictional content such as vampires and the Jedi have been approached in terms of alternative spiritualities. Since the early noughties, there has been in fact an increased interest in how popular culture, however defined, and often in its musical apparitions, may have replaced the social functions of conventional religiosity in Western societies, thus becoming a site for re-scripting the sacred, as it were. Full stop. In his investigation into pop cults, musicologist Rupert Till coins the term sacred popular to characterize the emergent cultural dynamics at issue. This bears certain similarity to the neo-Durkheimian theorization of the sacred by taking heed to its broader implications towards the formation of social identities. Here, and in front of the glass casing separating the violent musician from cultural heritage, the sacred constitutes a boundary mechanism, whether in terms of social, psychological, territorial, or economic relations. According to sociologist of religion Gordon Lynch, in its modern extended form, the sacred functions as a cultural structure that hinges on what people collectively experience as absolute, non-contingent realities which present normative claims over the meaning and conduct of social life. Regarding music heritage, the question is then, to what extent and more importantly, how does heritage manifest such absolute realities and normative claims? To chart out the extent, a propitious set of material is provided by the UNESCO ICH inscription documentation, particularly the detailed nomination forms. In any music-related quantitative survey based on them, one is immediately faced with the qualitative dilemma that concerns the criteria of demarcation, or which inscriptions are related to music and how. While the UNESCO portal, the search word music, yields almost 250 hits, when combined with dance, song, singing, and instruments, the net results includes 378 elements. The last of these is problematic in its own right, as the nomination form includes standardized instructions that concern providing information about tangible instruments related to the element in question, as well as about consistency with international human rights instruments. In addition, references to musical practices may be rather incidental, as for instance, in the case of couscous. I will not read that quote aloud. One can demarcate the material also on the basis of relevant topical terms recognized by the system, such as choir singing, dance, or work songs, in which case there would be 188 elements to be examined in total. Should one accept secondary level relations, the amount more than doubles. Overall, comparison between the ICH elements is further complicated by the fact that there are no standardized nomination forms available for the initial inscriptions from 2008. In the case of inscriptions mentioning music, this means that against the 191 forms provided since 2009, there are 57 for which similarly detailed information and justifications are not readily available. Thus, a full-scale systematic quantitative comparison proves to be problematic in many respects, if not impossible in the end, on the basis of the UNESCO materials online. With various combinations of search terms, it is yet possible to point towards certain tendencies. For instance, when searching for references to the so-called Big Five world religions, the following results emerge. One may note certain overlaps that might evince certain heteroreligious dynamics, yet maybe more striking is the regional dispersion, as more often than 4 times out of 5, the practices in question are associated with either Africa or Asia. Whether this signals another post or neo-colonial tendency to equate all things Eastern with religiosity and spirituality is a topic for another discussion. In that debate, some may yet find equally curious that there are no references to Protestantism in this regard, which for the followers of Max Weber especially might provide an avenue of investigation into the most hegemonic of isms, namely capitalism, and how it ties in with the heritization of music. Such interrogations are necessarily qualitative in nature, as are the ones where the intermixtures of music, heritage, and belief systems are examined in terms of the extended forms of the sacred. While this is the area that interests me the most, I am afraid I have to disappoint you now, and instead of presenting even tentative results and let alone conclusions, I will leave you with 2 questions or provocations, if you wish. First, assuming in the vein of Gordon Lynch that in social order the sacred is always present, how would it further our understanding of both music heritage and the sacred if each and every music-related element inscribed in the UNESCO lists were analyzed as manifestations of collective experiences about absolute non-contingent realities which present normative claims over the meaning and conduct of social life? I can't see my PowerPoint anymore. Can you? Well, the second, how might it benefit ethnomusicology and other disciplinary frames of music heritage if heritization was treated as an act of faith and a manifestation of the sacred, particularly in relation to the preservationist and conservationist paradigms and the variegated credos of an interdisciplinarity? I do hope there will be a chance to return to these questions, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that very engaging presentation. I have one question that I've seen that has arrived. If anybody has any other questions, apart from the desire by Professor Kärjä to have some more discussion on the questions that he raises, you can either use the reactions to raise your hand, but I would rather that you wrote them out just so we can save time in that way. So while people are still thinking or absorbing stuff, the question that I have is to Professor Summit from Daniel Avorgbedor. He says he needs a bit of clarification on the role of music in the Torah, and he has a quote, in anchoring you to your own reality. There's a way you can clarify that. You are muted, so yes.
Okay, could you hear me now?
Yes.
Great, okay. I lost the picture too. I don't know if other people lost the screen. Have other people lost the screen?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
I no longer see people's faces, but I could hear you. But as long as you could hear me, I could answer.
You can
We
hear
can see you too.
Okay, I can't see you, but that's okay. So could you, Jean, could you please ask the question again about music in the Torah?
Yes, if you can clarify on the role of music in the Torah, as you put it, in anchoring you to your own reality.
In anchoring you to your own reality, yes. the idea that music, this was used specifically in the prayer book. The analogy was that in Judaism, there's, and in many traditions, Islam, there's both there's the actual written text of the Torah, of the text, and then there are a whole commentaries on that Torah that makes it come alive and makes it relevant. The analogy here was that so too the prayer book is the written text, while the music anchors you to your own reality in the service itself. It brings an emotional affect to the performance of the words. A prayer is both in Jewish tradition called keva, it's the set liturgy, and it's also the kavanah, the intention that you bring to the understanding of the prayer, and the music could very much help you shape and understand the nature of the prayer in many different ways, joyously, mournfully. As such, it could change your concept of the theological meaning of the prayer. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. It helps.
Great.
Any other comments or questions? And raise your hand and I will see it because I have my gallery view open in case you have something that you'd like to say.
Ah, there we go.
Very kind. But these were very, very different approaches. Like the title says, this is like diverse aspects where we have heard from different kinds of positions about religion and spirituality, which is really, really rich in that way. Dr. Kärjä, you have something you want to say? You can unmute.
Yes, well, no one else doesn't have any questions. I'd like to ask Brita, Heimarck, regarding what I was intrigued there was this question of music as a tool, and in many ways was wondering about the kind of a hierarchy of realms there, that, or how maybe, and I don't know if in the end then ideas about musical ritual as a fundamental practice, that we get to a point where the kind of distinction between those, I mean, ritual and music, does not really make sense, or it becomes sort of futile. And then the idea of how the importance of sound comes into the play there, and that leads me to ask that whether sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, we're getting someone else's slideshow, but maybe I can still hear you.
Yeah. So kind of epistemological issue there, that in terms of that what in these rituals and maybe that what kind of knowledge is produced and transmitted there, and what's the kind of a medium or media in more general on which it relies on that, in terms of, let's say, the kind of scripture, the word versus the sound, and the way in which the word is uttered or spoken or sung and so forth, and also expanding, of course, towards all sorts of expressive techniques, dance, visuals, costumes, etc.
Right. Right. Thank you for digging in there. That raises some of these important aspects, and also relates to Jeffrey Summit's paper too, and yours, in regard to experience and finding the language to express experience, which can be part of the challenge that this post-secular work is, trying to rise to the level of finding the words to describe experience, which is not always easy. So I think what you're relating to is there's the theory, there's the practice, and there's the experience. You know, I was mentioning a 3-part kind of cycle. So in bringing this theory into practice and actually doing certain rituals or musical experience, then people can have an inner experience. And how do you describe that inner experience can be a very individual thing, which comes out in interviews, which I've done in previous presentations and previous work. But here I'm looking more at just how do we understand musical ritual and the relationship of music and ritual in certain contexts. So I'm using the South Asian example there, or music and ceremony. But I think that too, each practice has certain concepts, right, that are also in the mind or the intention of the practitioner. And so you're raising that as well. Antti, you could say Antti, your first name?
Antti-Ville.
Antti-Ville. You're raising that as well, how the conceptual world of the practitioner is also infuses their intention and probably their experience. So if they can put a certain word to the concept of a given ritual, say it's devotional worship in the case of arati, then that devotion to a particular teacher might also have a certain emphasis, or a devotion to a certain deity might have a certain emphasis, right? Some are for mercy, some are for strength or protection or, you know, articulation, other concepts might come into play. But I think that Jeffrey's last point also raises the point of an individual experience. So that even if there is a general cultural ideology that seems to be informing a given ritual or a given practice or a musical tradition, even congregation, then there's the individual level at which people are having their own experience, and one person's sorrow might be expressed, or another person's joy or ecstatic happiness at finding a collective that they can sing with, you know, might be expressed, especially after 1.5 years of COVID or 2 years of isolation. We might find some more joyous practitioners than when they finally get to come together again. It's been quite an isolated period. But I also had an introduction that talked about post-secularization. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Antti-Ville, because I had to cut that out in the interest of time. Yes, please,
Brita,
Jeffrey.
Brita, I was very interested, picking up on Antti-Ville's question in terms of when and I know your work, and I know that this was not an ethnographic piece that you did, but you've done a ton of ethnography. Yeah. And did you find that the worshipers who you interviewed and talked to could articulate the ways that music worked as a tool? I had to take out, you know, what could we do in a 15-minute paper? I have to take out a quote where one of the religious leaders said, actually, the quote was, "Music might be the most powerful tool we have in the spiritual toolbox."
You gotta send that to me.
Yes, and she said specifically to teach about change, because the processes of change were deeply spiritually connected to understanding God, and you know, and by understanding the changes that a congregation and a community went through and the ways that melodies changed, could teach people that nothing is permanent, and you know, and things change, but they were able to articulate it. What have you found?
You know, I've been very impressed in my interviews at how different people express their experience, and much more eloquently than I ever could have anticipated. I think you might remember from a previous panel we were on, there was a French woman who said some beautiful things like, we chant to experience the inner universe, and things like this, that I couldn't believe she was actually saying that. And that was her experience. She really meant it. And there were many things like that. People who said the most poignant things in simple language from a direct experience that really were very powerful. And most swamis in yogic traditions will say that it is the direct experience that, is where those powerful words come from, a direct experience, not just a theory. You mentioned something else, the tool. It was going back to the heritage. The change. That in the change, I think that's where it connects to the cultural environment. Actually, that's where I think that World Heritage would come in, because when there's change in a group, like a collective practice, and they make changes, like we're going to meet here instead of there, or we're going to go inside instead of outside, or we're going to have an hour-long chant instead of a 10-minute chant, or vice versa. When they make those kind of changes, I think that often does reflect certain changes in the culture at large. Mm-hmm. So the social, political, economic impact of a given location or a group of people, whether in the diaspora or in the homeland or somewhere else, that might show up, I think, in the process of change, deliberation and change among the group. I think there is an interesting connection to that outer influence there. Yeah.
I like how this discussion is going, especially among the presenters, because they're finding points of confluence for their work. But I just have one more question, just from some of the other listeners. I really had something you wanted to ask Professor Jeffrey.
Yeah, thank you for your paper, Jeffrey. I was just wondering if you could address any distinctive, unique new directions in the music performed at synagogues in the U.S. that is reflective of personal experience. And would there be any limitations on the music performed?
Thank you. I felt really bad that I couldn't include a bunch of musical examples in this because we just don't have time to do it. But there are there are many new directions, and in many of these emergent communities, and these are sort of 9 or 10 congregations around the U.S. that are doing have become known for, quote, where it's happening when you talk about music and prayer. And it's not just about music being participatory, because that pendulum has swung decades ago from performance to participation. It's even the physical setup of the space is changed from setting the worship space up in concentric circles where worshipers are literally touching each other. You could feel the person next to you, and then the music. The addition, traditional Jewish music traditional Jewish worship doesn't use instruments. Reform congregations always did, but now both conservative, unaffiliated, and even some liberal Orthodox, quote, Orthodox are exploring with drumming, exploring more with guitars, obviously. But there's a simplicity to the music to make it more performative, and it's also no longer so hierarchical in its composition. So the number of people who are composing, it's very common now to have leaders in congregations be composing music, not drawing it from a central hymnal in a group. There's a huge explosion in newly created music that often tends to be extremely local in its presentation. I could say more, but I don't want to.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about compositions. So you answered the question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have run out of time, and I don't want to go over time too much because we are in different spaces, all of us. And I would like to honor that with everybody. Svanibor, this is why it's so awful that we cannot be together to follow up our conversations in person, because I know people have questions and insights that we haven't heard because of the time. So I thank you all for your presentations, all the three presenters that we had, for starting us off with fantastic conversation pieces. And I thank everybody who has listened and thought about stuff, and I hope we will continue to have good dialogue. So Svanibor, let me give it back to you.
Thank you. I think this session was really a fantastic start. Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay. So we are ready to go to session 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you again. And again, my name is Daniel Avorgbedor, and right here in Ghana, West Africa. My time is 4:32. Yes. The panel title is Music, Religion, and Spirituality Today. And I want to emphasize today because right now what's going on in my area, I have one of my field assistants who is covering up day two of a 3-day event of music supposed to prepare a safe, sacred time space for the burial of a local chief on Saturday. So today includes what's happening right now for me. Okay, thank you. Yes, we have 2 presenters, and we have the first one, Mojca Kovačič, and Mojca is an ethnomusicologist and current director of the Institute of Ethnomusicology at the Scientific Research Center of the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts in Ljubljana, Slovenia. Her principal research is in the relationship between sound, social and political context. Her publications also encompass music and gender, migration, nationalism, cultural politics, language identification, and acoustemology. One of my favorite sub-themes I'm dealing with my class, acoustemology. Yes. So without much ado, I just want to quickly recap the protocol set for the observance of time in terms of questions, how much. So each person has a 15 minutes window. We have 2 presenters here, and after the 2 presentations, we'll then have 15 minutes of discussions. And again, as we did in the previous session, you can channel your questions to the chat, and I will retrieve them at the end of the session. So again, without much ado, I invite our first speaker, Mojca, to the floor. And she'll be talking about urban religious soundscapes and identity politics, the case of Ljubljana. That must be homegrown, right? Ljubljana. Thank you. We look forward to it.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Daniel. I will immediately start my presentation in order not to lose some time because we are so limited with it. My presentation will discuss 3 religious communities through their connection to religious sounding. I will also present identity policies that are enhanced through the media, formal state policy, as well as through everyday religious sound perception or reaction among Ljubljana residents. The first 2 religious sonic expressions are being more interrelated. This is how I present them also in the paper. Let me just share the screen to follow my presentation easier. Okay, so Roman Catholic religion is publicly expressed through bell ringing and bell chiming and dominates the soundscape of the city of Ljubljana. The second one, Islam, is presented through the call to prayer, Adhan or Ezan, as it is mostly called in our space, is only present in the city from last year, And the third one is Trans-Universal Zombie Church of Blissful Ringing. It's a funny expression, probably, but I will explain more about this later. It is presented through the sounding of small bells, dishes, lids, pans, and maybe some other sounds. And it is present in the city from 2014. The selection of the sounds of these religious communities is based on the fact that they are the most audible and also the most provocative sounds in the religious soundscape of the city of Ljubljana. After 2006, the first high-profile protests against the bell ringing appeared, especially in urban areas. In the following years, as part of my postdoctoral project, I focused on the responses of the Ljubljana citizens to the bell ringing. I also made sound map of bell ringing, had interviews with priests and residents, and also I conducted a large questionnaire among residents. And of course, I also analyzed media discourse. This was also the time when the construction of the first mosque in Ljubljana was going on, which in the years before the construction stirred the spirits and divided the citizens and the political public into advocates and opponents of the construction. Of course, I was aware that this was not about defending or opposing the physical building, but about the symbolic placement of the religion that was relatively invisible in the predominant Roman Catholic space, as Muslims mostly practiced their religion in basements and other improvised spaces of worship. Otherwise, Muslims in various European cities are facing similar oppositions to the construction of mosques or to the public sounding of azan. There has been a great comparative study made by researchers, and the monograph edited by Stefano Allievi is available online. It is called Conflicts over Mosques in Europe. So at the same time, one must be aware of the regional, historical, political, and social position of Slovenia, which after the Second World War promoted atheism, condemned the interwar ecclesiastical cooperation with the occupier, and severely cut society off from public expression of religious affiliation, and also in general shaped the attitude of many individuals or communities toward religion. In connection with this, and also the secular mindset that prevails in European political order, I discussed the phenomenon of the so-called Trans-Universal Zombie Church of Blissful Ringing, which registered in 2014, shortly after the legal basis was adopted that 10 believers are sufficient for an officially registered religious community. The religion's origins are tied to the 2012 and 2013 Slovenian protests, where thousands of people protested against members of the Slovenian political elite. The zombie church today claims around 12,000 members, as they could be registered online. The registration of this unconventional church community provoked reactions from the media, the public, and the Catholic Church, and with a great response of the secular society that joined the community, it provoked many social and political practices in the country and beyond. So let me start with conflicts over bell ringing and azan. Bell ringing became strongly problematized in the media, radio and TV, and online communication channels such as blogs, forums, after 2006, when the state authorities changed the legislation on environmental noise in such a way that bells were removed from the list of the possible sources of noise. The new regulation has triggered a wave of complaints and media discussions, which unveil two aspects why sounding of bells are problematic. On the one hand, bell ringing is perceived as noise, represented physically disturbing sound. It represents physically disturbing sound. And on the other hand, it means an ideological interference in one's public space or private space. In about the same time, around the year 2003, the public and media polemic debate about the construction of the mosque has been overly exposed. It also became a part of the pre-election debates for parliamentary elections and was mostly used for nationalistic political mobilization. A year later, the building permit was issued. A referendum petition against the construction was raised by city councillor. He collected around 12,000 signatures in 1 month. The referendum initiative was rejected by the Constitutional Court. However, the municipality of Ljubljana withdrew the permission to build the mosque on the planned location, and the construction was halted until 2008, when the contract for the new location was signed. This gave rise to another civil initiative that was again rejected by the city council as uncompleted. So now we do have the mosque and Islamic Religious and Cultural Center. This is how it looks. We also have the actual sound of Ezan since June 2020. However, I did not find any stronger response to the current sounding of the Ezan. The municipality actually replied that they had only one complaint. So, and one can be also found online. So that is why in this paper I rely on my previous studies, namely when there was controversies initiated on the basis of the announcement of the sounding of Ezan in the city. To briefly explain my methodology, in this part of the study, I analyzed online comments on forums, blogs, and other online posts in relation to religious sounding. What is perhaps not surprising, however, is that people's comments on Ezan are intertwined strongly with the comments on bell ringing, as well as people's reactions correspond to the current socio-political situation and individuals' positioning within it. So I will move to identity positions in relation to religious sounding of bell ringing and Ezan. Although the authors of my analyzed comments do not usually explicitly identify themselves as Catholics, Muslims, secularists, or atheists, their situational or more enduring identity positions can be identified within some of the comments. In what follows, I refer in part to the Abdel Fadil identity position categorization. She is a Norwegian researcher who researched the online responses on the Norwegian population to the controversy over the cross on the Norwegian flag. I therefore categorize commentators and present a citation of a comment for the illustration. These citations are from blogs and forums and interviews. So to be honest, I'm not quite sure if this categorization is okay, but it helped me to put in order a mess of comments I had to analyze. So there it is. So we can find comments reflecting conservative Christians' views. They do not initiate debates on forums themselves, those commentators. They rarely engage in anti-religious sound debates, and when they do engage, for example, in the case of bells, they invoke the territorial or cultural right to bell ringing. They see bell ringing as an inseparable part of Christianity. For example, bells remind you that we Slovenians are Christians, and even if you don't have faith, just know where you belong. They highlight the symbolic power of sound. You know, many people would envy you the presence of church bells because Not everyone is allowed to be near God. They also refer to the political past, marginalization of the church by the communist regime in the period after the Second World War and the post-war massacres that happened. For example, xenophobes would like to silence the voice of the church, which is steadily here, even if they would have to slaughter us again, as it was in the 1945. Next ones are comments reflecting nationalist views. They all refer to Ezan as the sound of otherness. And sometimes they overlap with the conservative Christians ones. Usually they express xenophobic views. They often refer to Christian identity, not as personal, but collective identity. They connect bell ringing with the overall position of the state within Christian Europe, with the Christian legacy, tradition, and heritage. The Muslim call to prayer is understood as a threat or the Islamization of the space. For example, we should never let Muslims in the country. Slovenians as a nation are Christians. Churches and bell ringing are our tradition. Islamists should go to pray in Turkey. Next one, if bell ringing is music, then this shouting is a song. Since bell ringing is not music, then this is difficult to call the shouting. Then it is difficult to call this shouting a song. So we have to limit the noise of both of them, and we won't have to dress like uncles from the desert. Then we have comments reflecting humanist or secularist views. I combined these two categories as they often overlap, but not always. These identify with a secular worldview. They are sometimes mediators in conflicts, humanist, and sometimes cultivate conflict by opposing to the clericalization of public space. In this category, we find comments on aesthetics of the sound. For example, it is an artistic form, it's beautiful, commenting Ezan actually, ones that advocate religious equality. If Ezan has to exist, it should be temporarily coordinated with bell ringing. Next one, look, everyone has the right to their religion, to be the same for everyone, even if I don't like Islam, or those who feel threatened by religious equality. Because do you know how many religions there are and there will be? Scientologists, Buddhists, Hinduists, Confucians, Jews, Taoists, Shintoists, etc. will also come. And will everyone demand their calls to prayer? And will we listen to these proclamations all day long? So those who claim historical, culture, or territorial right to bell ringing are also present. Sometimes they use it against other religious expressions, and mainly this is, of course, Ezan. In principle, Slovenia is still a Christian country, and churches and bells are part of the culture. I believe it can be annoying until you get used to it. Then it will be easier, or you will not be able to sleep if there is too much silence. The third example of religious sonority I treat separately, as it is quite different in meanings and provoking media and public responses. These are chimes and rattling of Trans-Universal Zombie Church of Blissful Ringing. When bells were being excluded from the legislation on noise that I already mentioned, the Zombie Church, I name it shortly, challenged this legal act by performing so-called sacred noise publicly with small bells, and the police issued them a penalty for disturbing public order and peace, which was later withdrawn, proving that this was a successful provocation. Being an officially registered religious community and being able to make noise in public with sacred sounds allowed to express their politically oriented protests in a very high-profile way. They chose the holy bell as the highest deity. They greet each other with bong. They perform holy masses in front of the parliament or other social political relevant places. Following examples of similar word practices, for example, the most famous one is the Church of Flying Spaghetti Monsters, or they also call themselves Pastafarians, that started with the idea to provoke creationism that was taught in schools, and later also religious headgear regulations by insisting to wear pasta strainer on the driving license photos. Some sociologists define this kind of religious communities as a parody religions, or, as I found in recent studies, as an invented religions. Joseph Laycock, who studied parodic religions in the United States, found out that such movements deliberately mimic the elements of established religions and are intentionally absurd. Laycock further notes that the function of such religions is not only entertainment, but promotion of public thinking about definitions and privileges of the dominant religions. And this is, of course, also in the case of Universal Zombie Church of Blissful Ringing. So to conclude, the three cases of these religious sounds are not only an expression of the religion of a particular community in space today, they are faced with many challenges, as people, especially residents, question the need for their presence in modern cities. While a modern democratic society is supposed to defend religious freedom and equality, there is often friction with the public expression of this right. Not only friction about the dominance of religions in space, but also friction about the boundaries between religions and between religious and secular space, and public and private space. On the other hand, in many cases, it is not the physicality of the sound that reaches our ear. We see this most in the case of responses to the azan, when it was not even present in the city. The perception of imaginary or real sound is essentially a construct of the contextual and experiential knowledge of its listeners. So to conclude, I summarize the findings with some words of philosopher Vojko Strahovnik, who says that the processes of secularization of society have resulted in a strong polarization of society. And today's post-secular society is by no means a society without religion, as Habermas says. It must necessarily accept the coexistence of many religious practices. Interreligious dialogue is at the same time intercultural dialogue. I believe that the public sound of religious practices should reflect respect and tolerance of diverse religious practices, as well as of atheism and secularism, public space, private space, and last but not least, establish intercultural dialogue. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mojca. You know, you have a very complex subject, and you've developed some sophisticated methodologies to address them. And we hope in the future we can begin to really share your research work and then learn more from you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so we move on to the next speaker. And next speaker is Fulvia Caruso.
Yes.
Fulvia Caruso graduated with honors in ethnomusicology from the Sapienza University of Rome, where she also obtained a PhD in cultural anthropology. She is an associate professor in ethnomusicology at the University of Pavia in Italy, where she also serves as the rector's delegate for the third mission. Her fields of research are music and migration, intangible heritage and its heritigization, music and rite, oral poetry, and narrative styles, and then visual ethnography. Welcome, and I invite Fulvia to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? And can you see?
Yes.
Can you
I
see
can
also
hear
the
you.
presentation? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, see the PowerPoint?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, it's a PowerPoint, but it's okay. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm sorry, as already Jeffrey said, not to be in presence, but anyway, I'm happy to see many friends, even if virtually, and I'm happy to participate to this first symposium about music and religion. So I will read because in 15 minutes I have a lot of things to say. So the contemporary scenario has suggested ethnomusicology to move more and more towards the study of how new technologies produce significant changes in the ways of making and enjoying music. For some time now, the pervasiveness of the media of live forms has been used by individuals or groups to reverberate in the network what happens in specific places. The world of religions also benefits from it extensively, like Monique Ingalls, for example, in 2019 showed us. The extraordinary condition of the global lockdown has offered and is offering an unprecedented scenario in which to investigate the role of the media of live forms in contemporary society. The confinement has accelerated a number of processes already underway and created new ones. During the COVID lockdown in 2020 and also this year, important calendric rites inevitably were suspended. In some cases, however, cultural associations, brotherhoods, religious companies, or single individuals have used the internet to fill the void created by the impossibility to fulfill the rite. Since March 2020, I have been creating a virtual ethnography, collecting behaviors on the web on various contexts and repertoires of ethnomusicological interest, with particular attention to some religious ritual calendar appointments that have been suspended. Here I will concentrate on the pilgrimage to the Holy Trinity Shrine in Valle Pietra, a ritual that I know well from previous field work I realized since 1999. This has allowed me to orient myself in understanding the behaviors produced by the pandemic. The sanctuary of the Holy Trinity, located at a ledge of Monte Autore between Lazio and Abruzzo, so in central Italy, has been the object of pilgrimage for centuries. It is open from May 1st to November 1st, a period during which pilgrims visit, also by foot, especially for the Feast of the Trinity, that is the Sunday following Pentecost, and for the Feast of Sant'Anna in July 26. The inhabitants of Valle Pietra perform a procession in the village on February 16 to celebrate the appearance of the image of the Trinity in the shrine, and a pilgrimage to the sanctuary for the opening of May 1st. The rest of the opening period, they are dedicated to welcome pilgrims. The soundscape of the sanctuary is extraordinary. Each company expresses a wide range of expressive possibilities, singing, invocations, prayers, which overlap with the buzz of those who have already made their visit and speak, play, listen to Mass, everything amplified by the convex shape of the rocky wall behind the sanctuary. Above this mass of sounds, the songs of pilgrims stand out, accompanied or not by various types of instruments. The arrival song is mainly the canzonetta song in praise of the Holy Trinity, replaced by the song on the miracle performed by Sant'Anna for the July visit. Often the departure is accompanied by songs of greetings for the Holy Trinity, and many companies continue to sing religious songs even after the visit to the Holy Cave. Each company performs the same canzonetta, but in a personalized way through micro variations. It is through singing, in fact, that the company testifies to its presence and faith. I will show a very, very short example, even if I could stay for hours on these songs. Here we are. But in 2020, all this did not happen. The sanctuary was closed short after the usual February procession in Valle Pietra. Then all the events were cancelled. Visits resumed with the summer, but with safety rules that discouraged many pilgrims until September, when the rules were loosened a lot. However, the autumn brought a second lockdown and restrictions continued until the opening of 2021, which this year took only place with the prior and few representatives of the pilgrims on May 1st. How did pilgrims react? In recent years, there has been a flourishing of Facebook pages of institutions that in various ways revolve around the sanctuary. The first one is the Brotherhood of the Holy Trinity of Valle Pietra, created and administered by the prior Paolo De Santis in 2014. The second one is the Holy Trinity Sanctuary official page, created in 2016 by Don Alberto, that is the rector of the sanctuary. And the third one is the Fede e Tradizione, Faith and Tradition of the Sanctuary of the Holy Trinity, created and administered by Filippo Graziosi, who is an active member of the Center for Studies and Documentation of the Sanctuary of the Holy Trinity, and was created in 2018. My virtual ethnography then have focused on these three Facebook pages to understand if and how their contents have filled the void of the closure of the sanctuary. Just the day after the lockdown, on March 10, a letter from the Major of Valle Pietra and the rector of the sanctuary was posted on the first two Facebook pages. Given the restrictions, I'm quoting the lector, that have also been applied to place of worship, in unison with Don Alberto, we decided to pray the Holy Trinity Sunday, March 15 at 10:30, each from their own home or place of work, to get this important message of faith to God, the Trinity. The initiative was welcomed by many and immediately reiterated on the 16th and 17th, mainly using the chants of the sanctuary. A proliferation of amateur videos animated the Facebook page of the Brotherhood and were reverberated by the Faith and Tradition page. I have no time to show you, but if you go on Facebook, you can find many of them. I have tried to classify this kind of intervention of presences on Facebook. And the first is that we can distinguish the faithful of Valle Pietra from the others. In the first case, the very first videos shows the sanctuary from far, without ever framing the faithful, and in many of these you can hear the young woman of Valle Pietra singing Pianto delle Zitelle, a lament about the death of Christ, sung only by the woman of Valle Pietra at the shrine the Sunday of the Feast of the Holy Trinity. The following videos show the streets of the town with the faithful looking out from their homes singing the canzonetta. This sense is to pay homage to the devotees who do not live near the sanctuary, allowing them at least to see the holy place and the holy village that is nearby. In the second case, The devotees instead posted amateur videos that show them inside their homes or courtyards with individual executions of the canzonetta. These are only instrumental performances reflecting the established habit of devotees to play an instrument to accompany the company to express a vow or their devotion. I will just show a small excerpt of this. Can you see the Facebook? Yeah, I hope. I have to stop it because we are short in time. So, as the days went on, many made amateur montages that accompany the devotional songs, audio only, from live recordings during the pilgrimage, with photos of people both from their previous visits and from the home on the Everything Will Be Fine with rainbows, as you can see in this picture. And that was a very popular theme in those days. With the arrival of Easter in April 12, Don Alberto decided to send a recording of the Pianto delle Zitelle from the speakers of the Church of Valle Pietra, reverberating it on the Facebook pages of the municipality and Faith and Tradition that were of course present in the Facebook pages in a video that shows the desert streets. You can see here just a picture. The desert streets of Valle Pietra while the song is being spread. This happened the April 30. In the following 30. In the following months, this produced requests from several companies to upload amateur video footages of their previous visits to the Brotherhood page. The first lockdown closed on May 18. However, the shrine opened June 15 after the Feast of the Trinity that fell on June 7 to avoid gatherings. Slowly the pilgrims began to visit the sanctuary again, but in compliance with strict rules that severely limited their influx. During this period, the pilgrim increased the request for selfies and videos to be uploaded attesting to the visit, almost always showing the same scene, the company in a reduced version, singing as they approach the holy cave of the sanctuary. The publications reached their peak in September when less stringent controls enticed many more faithful to go to the sanctuary. The habit of filming the company during the visit has been well established for a decade. The first shooting I showed you was by the company of Arsoli, so it's quite useful, but because they like to have a memory of the event. However, these shootings and shots were rarely put online. So this is something new. I continued to monitor the pages also during this year in 2021. The February procession of Valle Pietra took place, as I said, limited by the anti-COVID rules to only a few people from Valle Pietra, but they made shooting and uploaded them on the web. The opening of the sanctuary, as already mentioned, took place on May 1st, but with a poor representation of devotees because pilgrimages on foot, gatherings and overnight stays around the sanctuary were prohibited. But the Brotherhood made a video and uploaded it on the Facebook page. The rector of the sanctuary established a calendar of visits with the companies from June to September that allows for echeloning attendances. In 2021, the proliferation of video clips of previous and present visits that has thus continued, while the ad hoc production of executions from home has no longer occurred. The expression of online presence for this ritual, as for others, only occurred during the first lockdown, probably because the segregation at home has no longer occurred so peremptorily, even if we were always in red zones, but we were going around anyway. The sense of what happened is well explained by a devotee who emigrated. When I was little, I always followed my mama to the sanctuary. Unfortunately now we can't anymore, but I still have the best memories with my mom in the bus. Technology is good. In minutes we all know what we are doing and where we are, but memories are what keep us going on and allow us to remember. We learned from studies on pilgrimage that presence is central. Participating, getting excited are everything. The way to express it is strictly codified like a staging, and it happens best when it is shared with many people. In Valle Pietra, at the center of this representation is the performance of devotional songs dedicated to the Trinity. During the lockdown, the presence of the Facebook pages of the Valle Pietra Brotherhood became the means to be there somehow, reproducing the core of the ritual, the musical performances. The reopening, with a limited number of visitors, produced the need to reverberate the visit on the same page. No other Facebook page was created because faithful recognized that the page, that specific page, has a status of officiality that other pages do not have. The Brotherhood holds the shrine. The presence of the web on the web has provided the numerousness that the pandemic has prevented in presence. The contents are produced within a specific cultural circuit of use. The videos thus packaged speak exclusively to those who already know the ritual, that can be moved by those images through their memories. In this way, the virtual world follows the same behaviors acted for centuries at the shrine. Thank you. And I stop my... I hope I was in time. I have run. We cannot hear you. You are muted. Here
Great. Yes,
Perfect.
maybe I need to keep quiet. Yes, an intriguing paper, especially the methodology. So I don't want to preempt anybody's ideas, but I'll talk to you later on about visual ethnography,
Virtual.
sensory ethnography, and how these all come together to play in the context of traditional participant observer method, all that. Anyway, so I think we'll get there before we close, one way or the other. So since we are almost out of time, I would like to open the floor for discussions, questions. And when I look at my chat, there is at least one item about the mosque. If that is the mosque, it looks more like a rocket.
That's from my paper, probably.
Yes, the previous speaker.
Okay.
Sorry, that's Mojca.
Okay, it's I cannot really comment this. I mean, it's.
Do you want him to read that again?
No, I said I cannot really comment. It's a comment. It's not a question.
Oh, okay, okay.
I can add a comment. At least there is a mosque, because for example, in Cremona, where I live, it's not allowed. They have cultural centers, but not mosques. So we have maybe 3 mosques in all over Italy only.
Great. Okay, let me see if there's any other.
So maybe I can answer your question while the other think about something to ask, because I think that doing virtual ethnography for me was the only possible thing to do, especially in March 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But I did it. I collected a lot of material. But then I went in deep only with two realities that I know very well. The one is in Sardinia, the Castelsardo Holy Week. And even because they were my guests in Cremona in the half of February, so I was very afraid for their safety, for their health. And because they were in Codogno, that was the first village closed in Italy for COVID. So I was really scared, and we were in contact every day. And the second one is Valle Pietra. So I could do a virtual ethnography only because I know very well both the situations. So I could interpret what I was seeing, and I could call by phone my friends who are pilgrims and ask them about what I was imagining and having their feedback about what I was thinking of what was happening. And I know because being an anthropologist of music, I did the pilgrimage myself, going by foot, 40 kilometers to get and 40 kilometers to go back. So when I talk about presence, the importance to be physically present there, I know what I'm talking about, and this is what emerges in every interview I did also with the Brotherhood of Castelsardo. They were missing the sound, the voice, the physical, the impact of the voices. So a brother that is not a singer, they do rehearsals on Saturday before the Holy Week. And they were missing that moment too, but all the village was missing. So one of the brothers put his stereo outside the window and letting the recordings of previous singing, playing them so that people could hear the voices. And this happened all over Italy during the Holy Trinity. And I have seen it on Facebook. A lot of people around all over Italy during the moment of the procession were filming the void city and letting hear the recordings of previous processions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Any other person who has an idea, question, addition, or whatever? Because I have a lot, but I cannot, usurp my position.
There's a few questions in the chat.
Okay, let me check.
The musical side of the zombie church, and I was wondering too about the political aspect.
We have some questions in the.
Yeah.
Yes. And maybe I combine these two, because it's now I ran out of time to be more extensive on the zombie church. So it's not really about the musical side, it's about religious sounding. So they provoke, they don't play music, they just play the religious sounds. And that's how they provoke the legislation, because they were given penalties to perform religious sounding in public space, but bell ringing doesn't get any penalties when they perform religious sounding through bell ringing or azan. So that was provocative, and they didn't, and police didn't succeed. So the penalties were withdrawn. And the political aspects, yes. Brita, I can just point out to the book of Joseph Laycock, who studied parodic religions. He says parodic religions in the United States. And he found out that this movements deliberately mimic the elements of established religions and are intentionally absorbed. These are his words. And this is how they provoke the monopolism of dominant religions in the public space.
Thank you, that's
shortly.
wonderful.
Yeah.
It seemed there must be something like that with the spaghetti strainer on his head.
They were provoking the religious head, yes. So they wanted to be allowed to be photographed for the ID with this strainer on their head, and somewhere they also succeeded in some cases.
Yeah, we have one question from Katarina, and this is for Fulvia specifically.
Yes.
Fulvia.
Yes.
I'll read the question. I've read it. I haven't said the sanctuary. The images are there since the 13th century, and there are traces of pilgrimage since the maybe 14th century, and it is interesting because the image shows 3 identical Christs that mean in the Byzantine style. So it was not recognized by the church for centuries, and this allowed the pilgrims to go there freely and do their pilgrimage as they wanted. And this is political also. I could witness fightings against the priest of the village that was accompanying the company, because in the sanctuary the company holds the power, not the church. It is a direct connection with God. But the songs are not that old. The songs were probably rewritten during at the end of 19th century, and musically they were rearranged by a band director around the beginning of 20th century. But probably we using previous texts, and the 2 main songs talk about all the miracles that are at the base of the foundation, the foundation of the faith about this shrine. Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm not having my video and things all the time because the connection is better, but this is really fantastic, and also with 3 Christs. Thank you.
Yes, no, it's amazing, and yeah. So especially if you can go there, it's incredible, because really tens of people, thousands of people, everyone singing the same thing, but no one in the same way. I wrote a book, but it's in Italian, unfortunately.
Thank you.
And I think we have a last question. This is from Irene Markov. Says, this is from Mojca. Can you elaborate briefly on the holy bell of the zombie church, if I heard you correctly?
You heard correctly, yes. Just briefly, they chose the holy bell to be their highest deity. So they praise to the holy bell, and this is also provocation. And they greet themselves with bong. So it's a provocacy for the Catholicism.
Right, in a form of parody as well.
Yeah. But they don't admit that they are parodic in public. Never. So they don't say that.
I'm sorry, you said a bong?
Go ahead.
What was that? They greet them
bong
with a bong? Like to smoke?
Yeah, like bell, bong, bong.
By ringing the bell. Oh, okay.
Okay, I think we can take one last question, if we have one. I know time is far spent already, but that's the last session of the day, I think.
I'm sorry, I took coffee time with my
don't
problems.
worry. Yeah, these things do happen.
Yeah.
You know, technology comes with challenges. Okay.
No coffee. Break.
Great. So otherwise, I take this opportunity to thank the two of you for your wonderful presentation. And well, something's dropping here. One more.
No,
Let's see.
fascinating. Thank
Oh,
you.
so thank you. Yeah, thank you both. You did wonderfully. And we look forward to seeing you in the discussion sessions for the rest of the sessions. Thank you again.
Two sides of religion.
We're all now back after our break. It's been so good to hear everyone's voices, to see everyone's faces as they open up the camera as they're able. My name is Marcia Ostashewski, and I am an ethnomusicologist and a dance ethnographer, and I am based at Cape Breton University in Nova Scotia, Canada. Some of you may have heard of the Centre for Sound Communities, and that's an arts-led social innovation lab that I established here some years ago. And Joško, one of the presenters, also visited Cape Breton in 2014 as part of the Singing Storytellers Symposium. So it's really a pleasure to reconnect after too many years and only on Zoom, but still such a pleasure. And also to welcome Jakša. So our first presenter in the session, Glagolitic Singing, is Jakša Primorac. And Jakša is a researcher in the Department of Ethnology and the Croatian Academy of Sciences and Arts in Zagreb, Croatia. Since 2000, he has published a number of studies in ethnomusicology, ethnology, and history. His research is multidisciplinary and includes comparative studies of musical cultures, particularly various styles of collective singing in the Balkans and the Mediterranean. Jakša, please open your mic and share your screen, and we're attentive for your paper, A Controversy of Glagolitic Singing.
Okay, Marcia, thank you very much. I hope you hear me.
We do.
Okay. And do you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. So I will start. Of course, as you said, I will talk about some under-researched aspects of one unique vocal phenomenon, and that is Glagolitic singing in Croatia. Rather than starting this talk with a review of a brief history of this music, I will start by discussing one historical moment, less than 60 years old, which was not only instrumental in disrupting of Glagolitic singing, but also had detrimental effect on similar expressions of traditional music in the whole Catholic world. That is, this event, as many of you know, is the Second Vatican Council, which brought out immense reform of the Roman Catholic Church, which included a radical modernization of rituals and accompanying music, and its ideological attitude towards traditional music was predominantly negative. The reformers started to scorn that music, and they either placed it on the margins of church musical life, or they completely seized its live performance and replaced it with new modern music. That was the case with the Glagolitic singing, and it caused several controversies, and I will try to explain them here. So, the phenomenon of folk Roman Catholic chant in parts of Northern Mediterranean is the second aspect of my paper. For centuries, Roman Catholic Church aimed to control the aesthetics of church music by demanding Gregorian chant and art music in its rituals. And when that was not possible, the church stimulated local singers to sing simple popular church folk songs in some specific parts of the Mass. But completely different from this practice, only in the wide region of Northern Mediterranean, there existed a practice that male folk singers could sing the prescribed ancient liturgical texts along with their own traditional melodies. And this permission to break the rules, that is to distort official Gregorian chant by oral transmission of folk singers, was present in, let's say, parts of Italy, like Sardinia, Liguria, Veneto, then Corsica, and in some parts of southern France. So then sporadically in Spain and Portugal, but above all at the Adriatic parts of Croatia, and that is the area of Glagolitic singing. The linguistic phenomenon of Glagolitic singing is this. Predominantly Slavic-speaking Croats settled in the 17th century after Christ on eastern Adriatic coast. They were soon Christianized by Rome, and in the 19th century they were provided with liturgical books written in Old Church Slavonic language and in Glagolitic script from the missionaries, students of the Holy Brethren, and St. Cyrillus and Methodius. And the most controversial thing is that Croats in this area, from these times, even until 1960s, had the privilege given by popes to perform all rituals and ritual singing in Old Church Slavonic language or vernacular Croatian from the 15th century onwards. This was a unique example in the whole Roman Catholic world, since everywhere else the Mass had to be conducted only in the Latin language. And this exemption, for example, shocked many participants of the Second Vatican Council when they planned how to introduce vernaculars into liturgy and to abandon Latin language. I will show two examples. Here are two written scores of Glagolitic singing with musical notation. The left picture is Old Slavonic Our Father in the Glagolitic Missal from 1631. And the right picture is the beginning of the Mass in Croatian language from 1760s. As in another mentioned parts of the Mediterranean, Glagolitic singing went through three main historical phases. From the Middle Ages until the time of Enlightenment, that is the 17th and especially the 18th century, a great number of priests and other clerics lived in small towns and villages, and they were obliged to sing daily in choruses. But at those times, their number drastically decreased. So bishops allowed laymen to substitute them. And that singing, where every region had its own distinguished singing style and each parish had its own repertoire of particular melodies, started to suffer great problems due to the 20th century modernization, but above all, due to the radical church reforms in the 1960s. After that, it either completely disappeared or it had been practiced in the shadows of the new post-council choirs and bands until nowadays.
Jakša, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think we only see the first page of your PowerPoint all the time because you were talking about some other slides and
yeah.
You should give us.
I thought you could see everything. Can I start again a PowerPoint?
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea to go out, like to stop sharing and go out, and then come back in and just briefly go through the slides to catch up.
Okay.
Or just press slideshow, perhaps.
Okay. Now I'll go once more. Now you see the first slide, and now
Second Vatican Council.
Yes.
That's okay now.
Just you can just read it because I talked about it.
Yes.
Then folk Roman Catholics chant in parts of the northern Mediterranean. Do you see that?
Yes.
Are you seeing that? Okay. Then that's linguistic.
Yeah.
Linguistic phenomenon. peculiarity of Croatian masses, Roman Catholic masses only in Croatian or in Old Church Slavonic language. Then two examples of notation. One from old Missal from 17th century, and on the right in modern Croatian language, modern Croatian language from 18th century. And then I spoke about 3 phases of historical development on Glagolitic singing now. That was first priest choirs, then they disappeared in 18th century and were substituted by layman choirs. And the third picture depicts layman choirs most elderly from 1960s onwards. So now I'm on my seventh slide. Could you see it?
Glagolitic singing as confusing
term. Okay. So in Croatian public discourse, especially in elementary and high schools, term Glagolitic primarily refers to the script Glagolica, then to the Old Church Slavonic language, and third, to the priests Glagoljaši who knew Glagolitic script and performed rituals in Old Church Slavonic language. And all 3 phenomena disappeared in most parts of Croatian Adriatic coast from the 16th until the 18th century, except for Kvarner region, where they existed until the 1960s. Now, hope to see the next slide. Having these facts in mind, the question is, why do Croatian ethnomusicologists and some musicians call contemporary traditional folk chant in southern parts of Croatia Glagolitic singing? That is, when and how was the term Glagolitic singing invented? Leading Croatian ethnomusicologist after the Second World War was Vinko Žganec. In early 1950s, he recognized the importance of the rich lived heritage of folk chanting in southern parts of Croatia. And that was the time of intensive modernization processes in the society, but simultaneously, that was the time of strong communist rule. And Žganec felt that this singing will slowly start to disappear. And to obtain the money from the government for systematic sound recording of the mentioned chanting traditions, Žganec invented the term Glagolitic singing for this phenomenon. And why? The answer is simple. The communists were ideological enemies of the religion, but they were not against Glagolitic church heritage because it was a strong identity marker of peculiarity of Croatian nation, opposing various influences of neighboring nations. And Žganec started an important project of sound recording of the Glagolitic chant. His student was Jerko Bezic, who already in 1958 started to record and research Glagolitic singing, and that was his main research interest until his death in January 2010. And Jerko Bezic was the main promoter of the term Glagolitic singing and the main researcher of this topic in Croatia for decades. Now, could you see my 9th slide? Can you? Okay.
Oh, no, it didn't switch. It's just still Glagolitic singing. Sorry, it's small on my screen.
With these 2 pictures of scholars?
It did switch.
Yes, that's right. 2 scholars.
It did switch. Yeah.
It did switch.
Yes, we
now
can
it's
see it.
Seeing it as confusing term.
Yeah. Okay. As confusing term 3. Yeah. Okay. Singer's question is due to this discrepancy between folk and ethnomusicologists' perception of the term Glagolitic singing. Modern folk church singers ask permanently, why scholars advise us to call our singing Glagolitic while we don't know neither Glagolitic script nor Old Church Slavonic language, and our priests during previous 2 or more centuries also didn't know them. They were not Glagolitic priests. And the second thing is that they prefer singers from Central and North Dalmatia prefer to use the term folk church singers, pučki crkveni pjevači, but it opens two problems. First, it is not distinctive enough to differ from non-liturgical traditional church singing in northern Croatia. And the second, the word pjevači is based on a so-called Ikavian dialect of Central and North Dalmatia, and it doesn't represent areas of Istria, Kvarner, Dubrovnik, and Kotor, now one Croatian bishopric in the state of Montenegro, in linguistic sense. I hope that can you see my
Yes.
yes.
Probably
Okay, my switching.
If you open the presentation, you don't have problems of showing the old picture.
I understand. Okay, thank you, Fulvia.
You're welcome.
And finally, there is obvious the necessity to change the term. I was lucky that I was the last Jerko Bezic's PhD student, and that he, due to my interest, transferred his great knowledge of Glagolitic singing to me. I will be always deeply thankful to him for his kindness. We talked a lot, especially regarding the controversy of the term Glagolitic singing, and he admitted that he forgot to change the term into folk Glagolitic singing, pučko glagoljaško pjevanje, and asked me to do it. So I sporadically promoted this term during the last decade with some friends of mine, but I have to admit that I didn't succeed at all. Of course, the main reason for my lack of success is the fact that I continued to use the adjective Glagolitic. And very often, I think about the need for a radical change of the term. In 2009, our colleague Grozdana Marošević told me that something like Old Croatian choral would be appropriate, since in Croatian language we don't have the term chant, and the term choral is reserved exclusively to Gregorian chant. I was thinking of the term Old Croatian ritual singing, starohrvatsko obredno pjevanje. But this term could also be problematic because ritual could be understood as the whole church singing of Croats or of Croatia. If I use a more exact term, liturgical, that is scholar term, instead of ritual, many people unfamiliar with the term would connect it to the word liturgy, which is in Croatian popular discourse almost completely linked to Eastern Orthodox liturgy, and which is the synonym for Roman Catholic Mass. So probably it will be also abandoned. So to conclude, I hope that you understand more or less this tricky issue of the term Glagolitic singing. Joško will discuss contemporary singing and efforts to preserve it as much as possible. I would only add that concourse for inventing a new term is open and everybody is allowed to participate in it. Of course, this is a joke, but I truly believe that solution will be found in the approximate future. So Marcia, do I have some more minutes, two minutes or two and a half to present?
I think we've already gone over a couple of minutes, but I know there were some technical problems.
Okay.
I'm wondering if you might save your comments for the discussion period after Joško's. Will that be okay?
Okay, thank you.
Anything you might like to say to just wrap up? Okay, thanks very much, Jakša. And now to welcome Joško Ćaleta. He's an ethnomusicologist, a music pedagogue, and a conductor since 1997, employed at the Institute of Ethnology and Folklore Research in Zagreb also. His work is mostly focused on the vocal traditions of the Dalmatian coast and the hinterland. The results of his research are published in various international publications, predominantly in the proceedings from various ethnomusicological scholarly gatherings. He's also been awarded for recordings and for he's a performer as well. So welcome, Joško, and we'll have about 15 minutes for your paper and then a few minutes for discussion and questions. We can't hear you, Joško. Oops, we heard him just a minute ago before. Oh, your mic is closed, Joško. Still.
You have to unmute your.
Yes, yes.
There we go. There we go.
Now, okay. Sorry for this confusion. So I will share screen now again. Okay. Okay.
Great.
Hey, come on. Yes. That's it.
Perfect.
I will start. Among various Croatian contemporary musical traditions in the last several decades, there has been a high interest for presenting traditional church singing heritage in form of public performances, concerts. This is particularly true for Glagolitic traditional church singing. In cooperation with performers, folk singers, a music and stage performance is to be conceived in a way that would present this musical tradition to a new audience in a dynamic and more appealing way. The results of this kind of research have manifold effects both on the local community, its renowned performers whose singing skills deserve to be publicly presented to a wider audience, and on the results of research and knowledge about the music which the researcher acquires in a more immediate, direct, and I would say realistic way. These musical phenomena in which creation I personally am involved encourage me to think of the reasons for such an interest for the traditional secret musical heritage and for the variety of presented forms. Despite the marginality of the music phenomena, I will try to argue the claim that traditional church singing music repertoires today are largely dependent on public performance models by which they have built their present survival as possible potential popularity as a prerequisite for further survival of the traditional musical expression in the new music order dominated by the new global musical idioms. This paper will try to address the current state of traditional church I call Glagolitic singing through presentational models established in a process where authors' personal involvement played a crucial role. Personal research experience and application of knowledge and insights to the development of the mentioned music scene have helped me gain a clearer view of the complex state of affairs. I can illustrate that just one of the many examples that I have personally encountered in the last 20 years, and which is related to the oldest and the most complex phenomenon of church folk singing, Glagolitic. Researching the work of Jerko Bezic, that is most related to the musical tradition of Glagolitic singing, I have decided to follow his lead and determine the present state of practice half a century after his research. Glagolitic singing has been preserved through oral transmission for over 10 centuries as a distinct Croatian component of liturgical singing following the Roman Catholic rite. And this is a definition that Jerko put for this, that's how he defined this singing. All of that bears testament to a rich and complex history, which is today marginalized in the former centers of Glagolitic singing. Research, recording, and presentation of the older stratum of Glagolitic singing following the footsteps of Jerko Bezic have confirmed its existence, which we try to document as well as present in concerts. In many cases, the audio recordings made in 1950s and 1960s by Professor Bezic have helped us in our research. With the recording of the previous generations, the collective musical memory associatively connects the oldest experiences and memories in meetings with the singers, culminating in very interesting positive reaction and the attempts to retrieve the older stratum in the new way and pass it on the next generation. A positive example of the interference in one community is soon reflected in the neighboring localities. Oral transmission and good neighborly relation in which each local community tries to stay up to date and outperform their immediate neighbors have a major influence on future developments, which I have personally experienced in this case. Due to all of the above mentioned reasons and the social cultural changes making concerts the most acceptable form of musical events, the practice of public presentation of traditional church singing, especially the older, almost forgotten stratum, has become one of the basic models of preserving the musical heritage of traditional church singing. My personal activity can also be illustrated with the recent data which talk about my activity tied to the mentioned phenomena. I started with this Saturday concert in Utrecht, Holland, where I participated as the singer and creator of the musical performance together with 5 other traditional master singers, Cantaduri from Dalmatia, in cooperation with French vocal ensemble Dialogos, led by Katarina Livljanic, in the making of the musical project Dalmatica that features Croatian traditional church singing, relics of the past, monastery music from both sides of the Adriatic coast, including ancient Latin and Beneventana church singing repertoires. Prior to the COVID times, during the Lent period, I was involved in creating and acting several concert programs with the church choirs in towns of Ogulin and Slunj. For the Passionska Baština festival, I animated fraternities from Brela, Baška Voda and Makarska region, as well as Lika and Gatska region singing groups. Several other projects were happening in the same time. Recording of Glagolitic repertoire in Kolan of the island of Pag, neighboring Ražanac and Vinjerac, Posedarje, Novigrad, Polača, Pridraga in Ravni Kotari region, as well as Vid, Komin, Slivno, Vidonje in Neretva region. Beside the recording, their singing, they were also prepared for the most distinguished parts of their repertoires as a concert performance. Several thematic workshops on church singing repertoires, Lent and Marian songs are held in different Croatian towns. The concert season finished with several Klapa concerts where Klapa performed Holy Week repertoires from various coastal and island locations. All in all, my personal involvement with the traditional church singing initiated by the various projects in various forms is quite noteworthy. The mentioned just proved that the models of public presentation are one of the important factors in process of reconstructing, revitalizing, and representing archaic traditional musical ecosystem. Public performance helps the tradition bearers recognize the true value and significance of the music that was handed down exclusively to them. The phenomenon of traditional church singing belongs to the spectrum of local music phenomena whose presentation is not media actual, which characterize inevitability and inaccessibility to the general public. In this case, basic contextual dimension, the religious ritual accompanied by singing differs from frequent perception of the contemporary organized public musical events. Here, the term public practice is referring specifically to the concert type of performance because the church singing has ceremonial character as an integral part of the sacral ritual that as a rule, a public performance. Archaic forms of singing that are still part of the mentioned rituals imply the participation of the entire auditorium in the process of creating musical templates. The concept of performance featured prominent singers, cantaduri as leaders, initiators who, with their singing skills, qualitatively influence the final sound product. In this public performance, the music event is transformed from ritual to concerto mode of public performance. With this act, the musical performance becomes a public music piece and as such is subject to performance laws, which automatically places the issue of copyright. The new approaches and changes that have directly influenced church singing can be traced from several different points of view. Firstly, the relationship between the musical tradition and the historical events in the area we are investigating. They refer to the changes of social arrangement of the various authorities that ruled this territory, which left visible traces in the practice of church singing. Especially this applies to numerous armed conflicts and wars that have been present on these territories for centuries. Following diffuse history, we can talk about different religions that the conquerors of these spaces implement, bringing new rituals, new singing. Glagolitic chants that carries the prefix of the ancient features continuity for the centuries, allowed people practice of their faith in their own language, firstly in Old Slavic, then in Old Croatian Ćaleta, and later in local dialects and finally in standard Croatian language. If we look at the dominant Roman Catholic religion and observe events in the past and this century, we can notice that the changes that relate to the structure and population of churchgoer singers is conditioned by war events and post-war conquests. The second group of changes refer to the very church politics itself. At the global level, most of the evolution of church singing followed the changes of the Second Vatican Council in 1960s. Namely, after the liturgical reform of the Second Vatican Council, a new order of masses was introduced from the new approved liturgical books in the standard Croatian language. This had a particular impact on Glagolitic singing, since it is known that in most places of southern diocese, singers sang in Old Croatian language. Local priests and nuns, leaders of the singing in many places, play a significant role in the changes that arise in the musical practice of the church singing. Their knowledge or ignorance of the local tradition and the imposition of a new style of different repertoire have in many cases buried the old musical traditions. Somewhere, fortunately, it was only hidden into collective memory, where it waits for the opportunity to re-emerge from the old glory. The third group of changes makes up gender changes in the folk church singing practice. It is well known that singing in Southern Croatian church was led by male singers. The characteristics of old church singing was antiphonic chanting led by two male singing choirs with the answers of the whole church. Much changes occurred Second World War, when for political reasons a large number of men were absent from singing at church practice. Because of ideological balance, men did not have the courage to publicly participate in singing during the church rituals in which they were the dominant bearers of tradition before that time. Women took on the role of the bearer of tradition in many cases, which leads to change both in the repertoire and in the ways of performance. Women took the lead on singing in the form of choir singing, while changing the intonation, performing models, and stylistic features of singing. As a result of these changes, the singers' seating arrangement were changed. They were sitting in two opposite rows on the side at the altar, while the rest of the men occupied front benches. The last vacant row of benches was intended for women and children. Just a fuzzy visual look of today's churches during mass celebration indicates a thorough change in the seating arrangement. Singers are usually placed on upper deck besides and around the organ, if any, or on the front benches, creating the space between singers and audience that less participate in common singing. In many places, that novelty occurs with the introduction of accompanying instruments and the role of the cantor, player, and choir leader. Therefore, the previous performance models where everybody participated in singing have in many cases been replaced by listening to instrumental accompanists and singers of the church choir. Reconstruction of the old layers of repertoire tried to omit new church performance practice, promoting singing on two sides and processional movements during the performance of some pieces, recreating a notion of old-time common practice. The process of creating the concert program presented in above-mentioned examples is an indicator of the current situation and practice of public performance, traditional church singing. In a way, by following the current models of public presentation, it supports the preservation and relative popularity of the older traditions of traditional church singing. It seems clear that without such efforts, this older tradition would die out and soon be forgotten. On the other hand, we must also stress the importance of the researcher practitioner who, with their knowledge of the older tradition of singing material and the basic rules of stage performance, are able to mediate between tradition and the new audience, who, with their interest in and approval of the performances, give deserved recognition to the performance and their tradition and supports its future development. The models of public presentation are one of the important and key factors in process of reconstructing, revitalizing, and representing archaic traditional musical worlds. Public performance helped the tradition bearers recognize the true value and significance of the music that was bequeathed exclusively to them. For these reasons, due to the social cultural changes that today's musical events perceives as the most acceptable in the form of concerts, the public performance of presenting the traditional church singing, especially the older, almost forgotten layer, has become one of the basic models of preserving the heritage of music practice of traditional church singing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joško. Thank you. It's so exciting to hear about these liturgical or sacred music practices, and from my own perspective, working with Ukrainian Byzantine chant in Canada, there's so many similarities. So I have questions, and I'll follow up with you. But I imagine that there are a few questions, and I've asked that we stay on a few minutes. So shall we raise a hand, or does somebody want to open their mic or text a question that I can read?
I put a question in the chat there.
Can you describe, Brita says, can you describe these images that you were sharing, Joško, a bit more? The women seem to have golden necklaces on and costumes. The second picture is nuns, she's asking.
No.
I add also, there are Romans in many pictures, so maybe it was during the Holy Week?
Yes. Yeah, some of the tradition are again, they are arising and emerging in a form of festivals. So there is one big festival in Vodice near Šibenik that reconstructed this old ceremony of during the Holy Week. They have Roman soldiers around the Christ grave, and it started in 19th century when some students saw that in Loreto. And they brought over on our part of Adriatic, and it's still actual today, you know. And today they are making all theater of that, you know. And this festivalization helped this tradition to survive.
Thank you. Yeah, I was very curious about those men with helmets on too. Yeah.
Thank you, Brita and Fulvia, for your observation. Can I read the question from the chat, or Fulvia? Yeah, okay. So Irene Markov says, this question is for both presenters. Thank you for that, Irene. What makes traditional singing traditional from the perspective of musical style? I ask as I watched a YouTube video of singing that sounded like Istrian two-part singing that utilizes the Istrian scale, for example.
Jakša can say.
Jakša?
Okay. It is very, very, very simple to research that thing and to categorize what is traditional. Traditional is when you hear the melody which is far away from the Gregorian chant, because one big amount of melodies were created in some century, or I don't know how many time has gone, but many melodies are based on the accepts of Gregorian chant, or on the models of other singings like art music, like Beneventine chant. Even like some scholars thought about they were based on Byzantine chant, of course, of Greek chant of Middle Ages. But if you go in all places that Joško mentioned, from Istria and Kvarner, where Istrian two-part singing in narrow intervals, that is so-called Istrian scale, you will find on the island of Krk. Now it is completely disappeared tradition and that tradition, but from the recordings of Žganec, Bezic, and other scholars and melographers, they sang many parts of rituals, especially parts of the Mass, 5 parts of the Mass, exactly in their local style of narrow intervals, that it on some kind of rough diaphony, and that was amazing, and that inspired many ethnomusicologists, early ethnomusicologists, to go to the island of Krk and to research it. Also, let's say something about the other side. On the island of Hvar, we have procession that is protected by UNESCO, like an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. And at that procession, you have many melodies which are really particular, but they resemble the Venetian influence. They resemble the patriarchino singing in Veneto in some way, but something special is absolutely very distant from this tradition, and that is so-called laments or gospel-plač, lamentazioni in Italian, and this is microtonal style, one part monophonic style, which is totally exceptional, and so many scholars also researched it. So from Istria to the Montenegrin coast of Kotor and Budva, you will find very abundance of different melodic styles and local particular melodic styles and repertoire. Okay, Joško, take on.
Yes, I can confirm that what he said. I had many situations when for example, when I was in the Neretva region in one village, they start singing in a parallel fourths. So I asked my recorder, I said, you make mistake, let's do this again. And so they were singing 3 times the same. Every time they hear this fourth as a consonant for them, and in that village they still sing on that way. So you can find many good examples where this traditional music they are singing, it's very close to this. On this project Dalmatica that I was showing you, and I will perform for this Saturday in Utrecht Festival, we perform one piece. It's called Bog se rodo. It's in Old Slavic language from the island of Rab, and it's in the style of ojkanje, which is shaking of the voice. And this is typical for the mountains parts of the Croatia. But these people in the Turkish time, they were moved down on the islands, and they still took their singing with them, and still today, so 400-500 years after that, they preserve this typical type of singing.
Wonderful. Thank you both for sharing all this wonderful, rich detail. And I think many of us have more questions and are eager to hear all of this. But I'm just going to take one more question, if I can, Svanibor, from Katerina in the chat, and then I'll cede the chair back to Svanibor. So Katerina Ster says, for Jakša, I really do not know much about this, but since you mentioned that some melodies are partly based on Gregorian chant, are the texts of these melodies also related to the text from the original Gregorian parts of the melodies?
Yes, they are absolutely related. They are the good transcriptions, or the very good translations of the Roman Catholic liturgical books first in Old Slavonic church language that is only on the west, in the Roman Catholic part of Europe, translated in Croatia in Glagolitic singing. Apart from this, you research as a Byzantine chant, whether Greek Catholic or Orthodox, when that was so-called the Russian school of translating. And here in Croatia, in northern part of Adriatic coast, we had the schools of good translating for centuries, of good translative of liturgical books from Latin into Old Slavonic, and then it was, let's say, abuse in the context of Vatican politics, but in the vernacular Croatian from the 15th century onwards. So we have two traditions: Old Slavonic tradition of good translating liturgical texts from Latin that had one kind of umbrella that is the only recension of all Slavonic language apart from the Russian or Ukrainian style of interpretation of that language of Saint Cyrillus and Methodius. That is one part. And the second part is that from the late 15th centuries until mid 20th century, there was a big school of translating into vernacular Croatian.
Really
various dialects of vernacular Croatian.
Really interesting historical local agency in this music. Amazing. Again, I'm sure many of us have more questions, and we're really excited to hear more about this. And I expect that in the conference yet this will happen. Sorry, Joško, did you want to say something?
Yes, come to visit us and we will show you.
Yeah, I've heard the singing in the churches there and on a festival. Yeah. That's great. So Svanibor, I know we've gone 10 minutes over, but I think that's pretty good given all the technical issues. And I just want to say thank you to Joško and Jakša. We can all give them a hand, and our special thanks for rounding out our conference today. And I see the chair back to Svanibor now.
Thank you, Marcia.
Well, and thank you for wonderful chairing as well. And it was really a very special honor to have these two excellent specialists in this area together in the symposium. So thank you both.